AI has run the numbers. It's analyzed every war in human history, every geopolitical tension, every weapons system. And it's identified exactly how World War III will start, where a single digital attack triggers an unstoppable chain reaction of escalating retaliation. Advanced AI systems have analyzed decades of cyber conflicts and identified a terrifying pattern. Modern nations are so interconnected that one strategic hack could bring civilization to its knees within hours. The scenario begins with a sophisticated attack on critical infrastructure, perhaps targeting power grids, financial systems, or water treatment facilities. AI algorithms predict this initial strike would likely be misattributed in the chaos, causing the victim nation to retaliate against the wrong adversary. This miscalculation sets off a cascade of digital assaults as multiple nations respond to perceived threats. What makes this scenario particularly dangerous is the speed at which it unfolds. AI-powered cyberweapons can launch thousands of attacks per second, far faster than human decision-makers can comprehend or control. Within the first 24 hours, hospitals lose power, banking systems collapse, and communication networks fail across multiple continents. The tipping point arrives when nations can no longer distinguish between cyber attacks and acts of war. Military commanders operating with incomplete information and facing domestic catastrophe authorize kinetic strikes against suspected attackers. AI systems predict this transition from digital to physical warfare occurs approximately 72 hours after the initial breach as desperation overcomes diplomatic restraint. AI weapons systems gone rogue represents one of the most chilling scenarios in modern warfare analysis, where autonomous military technology makes lethal decisions without human oversight or control. Advanced predictive models have identified a critical vulnerability in modern defense systems: the growing reliance on artificial intelligence to manage weapons platforms that operate at speeds beyond human reaction time. The scenario unfolds when autonomous defense systems, designed to protect against incoming threats, begin interpreting routine military exercises or sensor anomalies as genuine attacks. These AI systems, programmed with hair-trigger response protocols, initiate defensive strikes before human commanders can intervene. What appears as a defensive action to one nation's SAI is perceived as an unprovoked assault by another's automated systems. The true danger lies in the feedback loop that develops between competing AI defense networks. Machine learning algorithms, trained to adapt and respond to enemy tactics, begin evolving their strategies in real time. These systems start making tactical decisions based on probability calculations rather than confirmed threats, effectively lowering the threshold for engagement with each interaction. AI analysis reveals a particularly disturbing element. The speed of autonomous warfare creates a decision-making gap where human oversight becomes functionally impossible. Hypersonic missiles, drone swarms, and automated defense platforms operate on millisecond timescales, while human authorization processes require minutes or hours. This temporal mismatch means that by the time military leaders recognize what's happening, their AI systems have already committed acts of war across multiple theaters. The situation escalates catastrophically when nations realize they cannot recall or override their own autonomous weapons once deployed. Communication delays, system incompatibilities, fail-safe mechanisms designed to prevent enemy interference all conspire to lock humanity out of its own military decision-making process. AI models predict this loss of control occurs within the first 6 hours of autonomous engagement. Resource scarcity flashpoint emerges as AI's most mathematically inevitable path to global conflict, where dwindling supplies of essential resources create zero-sum competitions that diplomacy cannot resolve. Sophisticated climate and economic models have identified specific resource thresholds that, once crossed, make warfare statistically unavoidable as nations choose survival over peace. The scenario centers on 3 critical resources whose scarcity creates cascading crises. Fresh water becomes the primary trigger as climate change and pollution render major aquifers unusable. AI projections show that when nations sharing transboundary water sources face domestic shortages exceeding 40%, military action becomes the preferred solution over population relocation or economic collapse. Rivers like the Nile, Mekong, and Indus become strategic choke points worth fighting for. Rare earth minerals essential for military technology, renewable energy, and electronics create the second pressure point. AI analysis reveals that as global stockpiles of elements like lithium, cobalt, and neodymium dwindle, nations become willing to use force to secure deposits. The concentration of these resources in geopolitically unstable regions transforms mining operations into military objectives. With supply chain disruptions serving as immediate causes for intervention, energy resources complete the trifecta as nations transition away from fossil fuels, while simultaneously increasing electricity demand. AI models predict that countries controlling key energy corridors, whether oil pipelines, undersea power cables, or uranium deposits, will leverage this power aggressively. When energy-dependent nations face grid failures threatening millions of lives, they calculate that swift military action presents lower risks than slow economic death. The convergence point arrives when multiple resource crises hit simultaneously. AI systems predict this perfect storm occurs when 3 or more major economies face critical shortages within the same 6-month window. Overwhelming international aid capacity and making resource warfare the rational choice for desperate governments. Space militarization incident represents AI's identification of humanity's most vulnerable and least regulated warfare domain, where a single destructive act in orbit triggers cascading failures that nations cannot ignore. Advanced orbital tracking algorithms have mapped every scenario where space-based assets become weapons or targets, revealing that modern civilization's dependence on satellites creates an irresistible strategic vulnerability. The scenario begins with the destruction of a critical satellite, whether through deliberate attack, anti-satellite weapons testing, or alleged space debris collision. AI models emphasize that attribution becomes nearly impossible in the vacuum of space, where evidence vaporizes and trajectories can be manipulated. This ambiguity transforms every satellite loss into a potential act of war, with nations forced to decide whether to retaliate based on incomplete intelligence. What makes this trigger particularly catastrophic is the Kessler syndrome effect that AI systems predict with alarming consistency. One satellite's destruction creates thousands of debris fragments traveling at orbital velocities, each capable of destroying additional satellites. This chain reaction accelerates exponentially, with AI projections showing that a single anti-satellite weapon test could render low Earth orbit unusable within 48 hours, effectively blinding every nation simultaneously. The military implications become immediate and severe. GPS systems fail, disrupting precision weapons and navigation worldwide. Communication satellites go dark, severing command and control links between governments and their forces. Early warning systems designed to detect missile launches lose functionality, forcing nations into hair-trigger alert status based on ground-based sensors alone. AI analysis reveals the true danger. Nations cannot afford to lose space superiority without responding decisively. When reconnaissance satellites are destroyed, military commanders lose their eyes on enemy movements. When communication networks collapse, nuclear arsenals default to pre-programmed response protocols. The window between satellite destruction and full-scale retaliation compresses to mere hours as decision-makers operate blind, deaf, and terrified. Make sure to stick around until the end, because we'll explore how economic warfare, AI-generated misinformation, accidental nuclear launches could combine into scenarios even more devastating than what we've covered so far. Economic collapse domino represents AI's analysis of how financial weapons can devastate nations more completely than conventional bombs, creating desperation that transforms economic warfare into military conflict. Machine learning models trained on every major financial crisis in history have identified patterns showing that when economic pain crosses specific thresholds, governments inevitably choose military solutions over accepting domestic collapse. The scenario unfolds through coordinated financial attacks that target the foundational pillars of modern economies. AI systems predict this begins with currency manipulation on a massive scale, where nations or non-state actors use algorithmic trading to trigger catastrophic devaluations. Within hours, a targeted currency can lose 60% of its value, wiping out savings, paralyzing imports, and creating instant hyperinflation that destroys middle-class purchasing power. The attack escalates through strategic debt warfare, as adversaries liquidate massive holdings of government bonds simultaneously. AI models show this flood of selling triggers sovereign debt crises that cascade across interconnected economies. Interest rates spike beyond sustainable levels, forcing governments to choose between defaulting on obligations or printing currency that accelerates inflation into economic freefall. Banking system collapse follows as AI coordinated runs drain financial institutions faster than central banks can respond. Digital bank runs, amplified by social media panic and algorithmic trading, can empty major banks within 36 hours. The resulting credit freeze brings commerce to a standstill as businesses cannot process payments, workers don't receive salaries, and supply chains disintegrate. AI analysis identifies the breaking point when unemployment exceeds 30% and food supplies become unreliable. Historical patterns show governments facing domestic upheaval consistently externalize blame and seek military solutions to distract populations. Nations experiencing coordinated economic attack calculate that seizing resource-rich territories or disrupting adversary economies through military force presents the only path to survival, transforming financial warfare into kinetic conflict within weeks of the initial economic assault. Misinformation and deepfake crisis represents AI's most insidious prediction for World War III's origins, where synthetic media becomes so convincing that nations can no longer distinguish between genuine provocations and fabricated threats. Advanced neural networks analyzing information warfare trends have concluded that the erosion of objective truth creates conditions where false flag operations trigger real military responses before verification becomes possible. The scenario begins with AI-generated deepfakes of world leaders declaring war, authorizing attacks, or making inflammatory statements that appear completely authentic. These synthetic videos incorporate perfect voice cloning, facial expressions, and contextual details that defeat all current detection methods. Within minutes of release, billions of people worldwide witness what appears to be undeniable evidence of hostile intent. Military commanders face an impossible decision: respond to what sensors and intelligence suggest is happening, or wait for confirmation while potential attacks unfold. AI models predict that the speed of modern warfare forces action based on probability rather than certainty. When deepfake evidence shows enemy troop movements, missile launches, or nuclear authorization codes being transmitted, defensive protocols activate automatically. The crisis accelerates as each nation deploys its own AI-generated counter-narratives, creating a hall of mirrors where no statement can be trusted. Populations demand retaliation for fabricated atrocities while genuine diplomatic communications are dismissed as manipulated propaganda. AI systems conclude that once this credibility collapse reaches critical mass, the distinction between manufactured crises and actual war becomes functionally meaningless. Accidental nuclear launch represents AI's most terrifying prediction, where automated early warning systems misinterpret sensor data and trigger nuclear responses before human operators can intervene. Machine learning models analyzing decades of near-miss incidents have identified alarming patterns showing that false alarms occur far more frequently and publicly acknowledged, with AI-enhanced detection systems paradoxically increasing rather than decreasing the risk of catastrophic error. The scenario unfolds when multiple sensor anomalies occur simultaneously, creating what AI systems interpret as an incoming nuclear strike. Solar flares disrupt satellite communications, while weather patterns create radar signatures resembling missile trajectories. Training exercises in one nation trigger automated alerts in another's detection network. These coinciding factors overwhelm human analysts, who must decide within minutes whether the threat is genuine. Modern nuclear command systems increasingly rely on AI to process the overwhelming data streams from satellites, ground stations, and submarine sensors. These algorithms, trained to detect launch signatures with extreme sensitivity, begin identifying threats where none exist. The machine learning models, optimized to never miss a genuine attack, generate false positives that automated protocols interpret as requiring immediate response. The catastrophic element emerges from response time compression. Hypersonic weapons travel so fast that AI systems calculate human decision-making, introduces fatal delays. Automated launch and warning protocols activate, sending retaliatory strikes toward targets based on algorithmic confidence levels rather than confirmed attacks. By the time human commanders recognize the error, missiles are already in flight and cannot be recalled. The multi-front convergence represents AI's most probable and devastating scenario. where multiple crisis triggers activate simultaneously, creating a perfect storm that overwhelms every diplomatic mechanism designed to prevent global war. Advanced predictive algorithms analyzing interconnected global systems have identified a terrifying conclusion. World War III most likely begins, not from a single cause, but from the catastrophic alignment of several escalating crises within the same critical time frame. AI models predict this convergence occurs when cyber attacks cripple communications during a resource dispute, while deepfake propaganda inflames populations and autonomous weapon systems operate without reliable human oversight. Each individual crisis might be manageable in isolation, but their simultaneous occurrence creates cascading failures across diplomatic, military, and economic systems. The breaking point arrives when decision-makers, operating with compromised information systems and facing domestic collapse, must respond to multiple existential threats at once. AI analysis shows that human cognitive capacity cannot process this level of complexity under extreme time pressure. Nations default to pre-programmed military responses, choosing decisive action over paralysis. What makes this scenario most chilling is its inevitability. AI systems calculate that as global tensions increase and technology accelerates, the probability of multiple triggers aligning approaches mathematical certainty. These 8 AI-predicted scenarios paint a sobering picture of how World War III could begin. But here's the crucial insight. The same artificial intelligence systems that identified these threats are also developing solutions to prevent them. Advanced AI models are designing early warning systems, diplomatic protocols, and technological safeguards that could stop these cascades before they start. Understanding the threat is only half the battle. The future of humanity may depend on whether we implement these solutions in time. Make sure to watch that video next to see how AI might save us from the very scenarios it predicted. Thanks for watching, and remember, awareness is the first step toward prevention.